Helen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your very kind words and for the invitation to come back to Dublin. This is my first visit to Dublin for 10 years, so I've been walking around the city today. I see things I remember from 10 years ago, and then I walk around the campus here, and I suddenly see new buildings where I don't remember seeing buildings before, so it's been a real experience for me. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk. What I'm going to do, at Helen's request, in the next 35 minutes, is give you a whistle-stop tour through the open science agenda that LERU, the League of European Research Universities, is advocating to all its member institutions, the 23 member universities in LERU, and by extension to all other research-performing organisations in Europe. And these are the topics I'm going to try and cover, and I'm going to use, where possible, examples from my own institution, University College London, in the centre of London, to illustrate how we try to engage with the open science agenda. So the first point to make is about the phraseology, open science, because in British English, or UK English, science is a subset of disciplines, the physical sciences, the biological sciences, engineering. It explicitly excludes arts, humanities, and social sciences. And I'm a historian, so if I'm using the word science in the UK, I know I'm not talking about arts, humanities, social sciences. Open science is a European phrase, and it's using science in the European sense. It's an invention of the Commission, the European Commission, and they're using it, using the Latin word scientia as the root, meaning knowledge or understanding or learning. So when the Commission talks about open science, they really mean open scholarship, because it includes everything, including arts, humanities, and social sciences. I did point out to the Commissioner when they were developing the programme that open science wasn't a very helpful phrase in British English, and as usual when he talks to a Brit he tells you to go and get lost, so he wasn't particularly interested in my grammatical insights. But so that's the first point to make, that I'm not excluding arts, humanities and social sciences just because I'm talking about open science. This talk is a joint talk between myself and my colleague, Dr. Ayris Ignat, who unfortunately can't be with us today because he's based in Munich. But we contend that open science, that the spread of open science is really more than a change in process and more than a change in terminology, but represents an absolute change in research culture. And we've tracked three changes, which I'm going to try and illustrate during the course of the talk. How scientists collaborate and work together to create knowledge, how they find meaning in knowledge, and the relationship between the citizen and the researcher. And the open agenda transforms all these relationships and brings new possibilities to the fore with benefits. So we are contending that open science is an absolute change in culture in the way that research is done. And in the talk, I'm going to try and explain what that change in culture looks like when you operationalize it and start producing services to deliver on the open science agenda. So this is the definition that I'm using for open science during the course of the talk. Open science, open scholarship, is a movement to make scientific research, data, and the communication of those results accessible to all levels of an inquiring society, whether you're an academic or whether you're not. It's about everybody. It's about collaboration, and it's about being inclusive. And here you can see how that works in practice, because on the left-hand side, in yellow, I've tried to identify some key stages in the research cycle. So if you're a researcher, this is a kind of common pattern that your research would follow, from conceptualizing the idea, posing the research question, what's the question you're trying to answer in your research, gathering your data, analyzing it, reviewing the findings, and then publishing the results. Those are the standard steps in the research cycle. And on the right-hand side, I've tried to list some of the open science characteristics that relate to the research cycle. And the ones in red are the ones I've chosen to talk about today. So the four areas I'm going to talk about, and what Tiberius and I are going to talk about, because it's a joint presentation, is open access. That's where I'm going to start. That's the best known feature of open science, but it's only one building block. Open science doesn't equal open access. Just because you're doing open access doesn't mean you've ticked the open science box, and you've only just started, actually. Open science is just the starting point of a journey. Open access, rather, is just the starting point of a journey into open science. So I'll start with open access. I'm going to talk about research data. I'm going to talk about university publishing and the role of the library as an institutional publisher in an open world. And then we're going to finish with Dr. Ignat's slides on citizen science. And remember, when I talk about science, I mean all subject areas, not physical science and biological science, but all scholarship, areas of scholarship, and what the library's role is in citizen science activity. And I'm going to use an example from my own institution, which has been particularly successful in the citizen science space. So let's start by talking about open access. So open access in my country, in the UK, is strongly supported by our research funders, by the 7 research councils, currently in Research Councils UK, and by the Wellcome Trust, which is Europe's biggest funder of biomedical research, which, as it happens, as Helen will remember, is just around the corner from UCL, and just 2 minutes walk from the British Library in Euston Road. And it's because they will fund open access payments, article processing charges, that we in my country have a preference for gold as the route to open access. Many European countries would prefer green, partly because it's cheaper, partly because it's easier to administer. In the Netherlands and in the UK, it's the reverse. It's a different colour. It's gold because the research funders will actually pay the article processing charges. This is a graph showing how many article processing charges my university has paid since we started counting. So this count starts in April 2013 and runs through to March 2017. So about 4 years. And all these payments are managed by the library. So the library is the fund holder for all the money coming in from Research Councils UK, that's RC UK, and we get about £2 million a year from RC UK to fund article processing charges for funded RC UK research. And then COAF WT, that's the Wellcome Trust and the associated charity funding, we get about £750,000 a year from the Wellcome to fund. The Wellcome's fantastic because you tell the Wellcome, well, actually, it costs more than £750,000. We spent another £200,000 on APCs. And they'll say, oh, no problem. Yeah, send us the invoice and we'll pay you the money, because they're really keen to pay APCs. So they're being an extremely generous funder of research, which has hastened the use of gold APC payments by our academics, because they know they're going to be funded if they're getting a welcome grant. And then UCL Gold is the funding stream that my university puts in to fund gold payments for those researchers that aren't funded by an external funder. Hello.
Good question.
Sure.
Do you only pay for the funded research or for other?
No, the first two, RC UK and Wellcome Trust, will only pay for their own funded research. If you're not funded by that research funder, they're not, unfortunately, not yet that generous, so they don't pay. So we paid about 8,500 APCs through the library and through the OA team in the library. The impact has been to put the library absolutely at the centre of the research process in terms of dissemination, because every payment of an APC charge requires a dialogue between the OA team and the researcher about meeting the funder requirements. Because sometimes, and in science, in the UK sense of science, so not arts, humanities and social sciences, papers are often co-funded by more than one funder. So you could have a piece of research funded by 2 or 3 funders, all putting in a bit of money. And no, open access policies are marvellous because we have so many of them. They're not all the same. So researchers are really confused. One of the downsides of the UK position is that researchers are really confused about how they meet their funder requirements, because the funder OA policies are different. The RCUK policy is different from the HEFKI policy. That's different from the Wellcome Trust policy. That's different from a European Research Council requirement. That's different from a Horizon 2020 requirement. And the researcher says, I've just no idea what to do. I'm completely confused. Somebody needs to tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And that's what the library does. So the library has taken on a really central role in managing the transition to OA across the institution by providing not only the funding, or managing the funding, but actually providing the advice service that supports researchers to meet the requirements. Let's move on to a separate aspect of research communication, and that's the role of the institution as publisher. And what we have done in my institution is to establish our own institutional press called UCL Press. I'm the chief executive of UCL Press because it's a department run from the library. And we are the UK's first fully open access university press. So everything we publish has an open access component. We started 2 years ago in May 2015, and as of November this year, we've published 50 monographs, so 50 research monographs, mainly in the arts, humanities and social sciences, and we published 9 journals. So my first question to the audience, there are 50 monographs there. How many times do you think they've been downloaded in 2 years? Give me a download figure. How many times do you think they've been read? 200,000? Any advice? Well, yes. Okay, that's a good question. So let's go back to download because I don't know whether they've been read. But I've got a bid for 200,000. Any advance on 200,000, or do you want to come lower than 200,000? Someone tell me. I'll tell you what I projected. When I set up the press, I projected in year 1 we'd have 10,000 downloads. Your colleague suggested 200,000. Any change on 200,000? I feel this is like Christie's, where I'm bidding. This is an auction. The actual answer is 700,000 downloads in 2 years. So I was completely out when I set up the press because I didn't realise the impact that open meant in a world where paying for research monographs at £50 a head is simply too expensive for most people to bear. The monograph market is quite different from the journals market. When you sell journals, the publisher is selling to libraries, by and large, not to individuals. So it's the library that controls the budget, and they're selling big deals to libraries. The business model for monographs is quite different because they're not particularly selling to libraries. They're selling individual copies over the bookshop counter to individual purchasers, to students and to academics. The average cost of a book is £50 a hardback. That's too much for a student, particularly in my country where we're charging the student tuition fees. The student debt, I'm afraid the average student debt for a UK student after 3 years of undergraduate education is £50,000, which they have to pay back. So they're not going to buy a lot of books because they're incurring a lot of debt, paying tuition fees and just living in London. So that's where open approaches and why the open access press has made such a difference. The average number of sales for a research monograph is incredibly low. It's about 100. If a publisher's selling 100 research monographs, they think that that's a good outcome. We have a sales option in the press, so the open access version, the digital version, is free, and it sits in our repository, UCL Discovery, and that's where all these 700,000 downloads, that's where they're coming from. You can, if you want to, buy a paper copy to read. The average sales for paper copy is coming out at something like 120 to 200 copies per item that we publish. So the sales are still reasonably good. It's just that the digital version, which is free, is just so much better. Why is that important to the institution? Because the downloads are happening in 218 countries around the world. We map where the downloads are coming from. We put all our copy on JSTOR, the North American platform, and that has instantly doubled the number of downloads that we get. And that's why it's 700,000, not 200,000. If it had just been from the Discovery, from the UCL repository, it would be closer to 200,000. Putting them on JSTOR opened up the North American market, where academics know that there is good content in the JSTOR platform. And that's absolutely revolutionized the way that our material is being used. And in UCL, it's linked very closely to the global engagement agenda. So we have an institutional global engagement strategy, where we try to offer services and make a difference in developing countries, in the global south and in developing countries. And we've highlighted a number of countries where UCL wants to make a difference and deliver core partnerships. And the press is seen as absolutely one way of delivering on the global engagement agenda because of the number of downloads and the wide variety of countries that are actually downloading the material. Hello. Yeah, I'll do my best to answer.
How do the academics themselves respond to the UCL press? Because I know a lot of people, especially in our humanities,
yes,
they say, okay, it's a sign of quality if a particular press publishes their work.
Do they say that?
That's what they say to me anyway.
They do, yes. Okay, so we have a list of books being offered for publication, mainly by UCL authors at the moment. That is about 150 authors. We have 150 titles going through the peer review process. So we're planning for publishing for about 3 years ahead. There's absolutely no shortage of authors who want to publish with us. And why? Because of the number of downloads. The most downloaded book in the press series is Danny Miller's book on social media and the World Wide Web. So Danny Miller, Professor Danny Miller, is in our anthropology department, and he's funded by a European Research Council grant to do a series of 10 books. They're all in open access on the press website on the use of social media. And the core book in the series, How the World Changed Social Media, has been downloaded 150,000 times. Just one book. And I said to him, you could have published with anybody. You could have gone to Cambridge, you could have gone to Oxford, you could have gone to Yale. They would have published you. Why did you choose UCL Press when we've only just started? And he said he wanted open access. And these commercial publishers didn't offer the kind of open access that he needed to get his results out to developing countries who wouldn't be able to afford to buy the commercial offerings that another publisher might have given. So yes, they were reluctant to start with. Now I can't stop them clamoring to publish with us.
Of course, UCL is a great brand itself.
But so is
UCL is a fantastic place itself.
But so is GCD, and so are Irish universities. It will actually. My own view is that having an institutional press that's an OA press run with open science values enhances the reputation and the visibility of your institution. So it's not only servicing scholarship, it's servicing the institution as well.
Brilliant.
Hello. Yes.
Based on this one here, that do you, I mean, these are fantastic open science metrics are things that we see really matter,
Yes.
especially with the societal impact and cultural impact agenda, and especially in arts and humanities, because they don't have the other metrics to show. Are you, the downloads, which are incredibly powerful,
yes.
Are you able to provide your authors with other types of data?
Yes, so we have that's a good question. In the UK, we have a national evaluation system for our research outputs called REF, the Research Evaluation Framework. Part of the Research Evaluation Framework is to deliver impact case studies, and you get extra credit for delivering impact case studies where you show that your research is having impact. The press is producing a number of impact case studies showing that our books are on university curricula, they're being cited by other authors in their footnotes, and they're making a difference. And Danny Miller's series of 10 books is one of the key case studies we'll be offering. So yeah, it's been a huge surprise, but a very pleasant one that it has worked so well. Let's move on. This is the shape of the press. We have 6 staff. They're all publishers. None of them is a librarian. They all come from professional publishing backgrounds. So they provide the publishing knowledge, and the open access knowledge, the open science knowledge, the open access business model is provided by me as the chief executive of the press. So we've met in the middle. So the success of the press is about bringing professional publishers and professional librarians who know about open access and having that discussion and agreeing in the middle what your business model and your values look like. And that's the main reason this has been a success, because we've agreed how to take it forward together. Let's move on. My second area that I'd like to talk about is research data management. And most of what I'm going to say about research data management comes from this EU-funded project, the LEARN project, which finished in May this year after 2 years. And then there are a number of partners, 5 partners there listed on the screen, who contributed to the work. We've got a number of deliverables, and the purpose of the deliverables is supposed to inform research-intensive universities how they can embrace open science as a set of values and as a set of deliverables, and what you should be aiming for. So these are the deliverables. We've delivered a model research data management policy. So who in the audience, my second question, who in the audience knows whether you have a research data management policy, either here in Trinity or in your own university if you're not from Trinity? I can see some hands. How many people know they haven't got a research data management policy? I can see a few more hands.
I know some of it. Surely not all.
How many aren't sure whether you've got one or not? Yes. Okay, so the point of the model template is that LEARN went through 20 research data management policies from across Europe and distilled the main characteristics of each policy. And using that distillation of 20 policies, we came up with our own model template on, if you were writing a research data management policy from scratch, what should it say, who should it address, and what are the issues that you really need to take account of? And that's what the template policy does. Another deliverable is, I won't go through all of them, but let me talk about the executive briefing. So, because I wrote the executive briefing is a 2-page high-level briefing you could give to your provost or vice-chancellor or your deputy vice-chancellor, because if you're going to interest them in research data management, and particularly finding money to fund infrastructure to deliver open science research data management activity, you're only going to have them for about 5 minutes before they get bored and go and start talking about something else. So if you give them a 20-page paper, they're not going to read it, because they'll say, Paul, I'm just too busy. I haven't got time to read all this. Just tell me what it says. So that's what the executive briefing does. It delivers core messages to a senior decision maker in the institution about what they need to do if they want to embrace open science practices around research data. Why is research data important? Well, because it's a new currency of research. I've talked about publications. Open access is about publications, not so much about data. But in an open science world, you can make not only the publication available, you can also make the underlying data available. In some communities, sharing data is a given. In other communities, like mine, I'm a historian, they wouldn't dream of sharing their data. And I had a very interesting discussion with one of my history professors in UCL, and he had just published a book, not with UCL Press, unfortunately, but he'd just written a book on European history. I said, it's really great to see your book. Thanks so much for making this available. But did you think that you could share the data along with the book, so we could see not only your conclusions, but also that you're working, see how you've got to your conclusions by looking at the data? Because that is part of open science. It's about verifying the research by checking the underlying data. So he thought for a minute and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to release the data. So I said, oh, that's a bit of a shame. Why, do you mind me asking, why don't you want to release the data? It's a really clever thing to do if you release the data alongside the book. So he said, oh, well, if I release the data, people will read it. And if they read it, they might come to a different conclusion from the one I've come to in the book. And I wouldn't like that. And I said, but in an open world, isn't that what research is about? It's not about being right. It's about being transparent and sharing your results and your thinking with the wider community. There is a real challenge in implementing and advocating for open science approaches in data, because not all subject areas have a tradition and a culture of sharing. And arts and humanities, I say this because I'm an arts and humanities person by training, are particularly bad at sharing, but it is the direction of travel. It's like Canute saying, the tide mustn't come in, you can't come past me if you're going to say, I'm not going to share data, because that is simply that's not going to work. Open science is about changing the culture. It's a new culture in the way research is performed and shared and communicated. So one of the things we've done in my library is to appoint 2 research data management advocacy officers, Daniel and Miriam. And they do nothing but advocate for research data management, for open data, where open data is possible. And they help people construct research data management plans at the start of their research. The main reason that open data, sharing your data, making it as fully accessible as your publications, as an open access publication, is for this third topic that I'm going to talk about now, the European Open Science Cloud. This is the high-level expert group report that recommended the construction of a pan-European open science cloud, mainly for research data, but for publications as well, that would create a pervasive repository or access to a pervasive network of open information, publications, and research data across the member states. And I was a member of the working party that wrote the report. And these are the high-level issues here at the bottom of the screen that we discussed and that are contained in the report. And these were the headline conclusions that the report came to. We said that for open data, the recommended position should be that it is fair data, that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. If your data is fair data, it's then open data, and it can then be a candidate for inclusion in the European Open Science Cloud. Why is that important? It's important because it will have making data available through the cloud will have the same impact on the visibility of the research and your ability to verify research, the same impact as the UCL press stats have had on the visibility of our research. By the sheer fact of making it open and sharing it, you'll transform the way that research is understood and used and available across the world, and that will do enormous benefit to your institution. Hello.
A lot of the open data initiatives that I've come across, that would have been associated with smart cities, for example, they spend a huge amount of their time arguing about what format the data should be in for that interoperability,
yes,
or that reusability.
Yes.
And I mean, you can see it being, I love the idea that art humanities, right to the sciences is included in this discussion, but you could see it being a nightmare. So do you mean something else by interoperable there?
No, I don't. So what the EOSC is doing, the implementation group, is devising principles of engagement, which will provide a framework for how you make your data fair and how then it can be included in the cloud. We don't want to go down the route of almost theological discussion. I'm a theologian by training. We don't want theological discussions of, what format the data should be in and what size the file should be, because that will just be, and librarians love that sort of discussion, but we'll just not get anywhere. Yeah. So it needs to be straightforward and clear, and we need to encourage. That's the role of the library. See, the role of the library in the research data space is to encourage best practice by recommending and advocating to subject communities that they agree to certain standards, whatever those standards are. We're not going to say what the standards should be. It's not about external compliance, but it's about getting researchers to act responsibly, to change the culture in the way that they work. So they are sharing, they are talking to each other, they do agree on standards for research data that's produced in history, or in environmental studies, or in biology, and then you've got an agreed set of principles that all researchers will be able to follow. So fair can mean different things in different subject communities based on subject-based discussions, which the library can and should lead in terms of trying to broker agreement. That's one of the really important roles that libraries have in research-performing organizations. So if you go back to your organization and you say, I haven't got any staff who can do this, then that's a problem. And my suggestion would be you need to think about where your priorities lie. Do you need another 2 people on the issue desk? Do you need another 2 people to go out and catalogue? Or do you need 2 people to advocate for fair data and open science activity across the institution? Where's the maximum benefit? And only you can decide that. But that's what we did in my institution, which is why I repurpose posts in my institution. So we introduced, the way I created the posts was to introduce self-issue and self-return through RFID tagging. And we introduced that in all 18 libraries across UCL. And that released some posts, which could be redesignated as research data posts, because they can do so much more interesting things than stamping books all day. And now, about 85% of all our issues are all self-service issues going through RFID. You don't need issue desks, with respect, 6 people sitting on them just stamping books all day. So you think smart, and then you can reprioritize how you use your resources. And that's what we did in my institution. Okay, so the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud, is issuing a declaration. It's about to issue a declaration, and LERU, and so Trinity, is being asked to sign up to the declaration. And the meeting we'll have with the LERU vice-rectors tomorrow is about signing up to the principles which the declaration is going to require of all the signatories. And these are the areas that the declaration covers and that LERU will commit to working in. So I've talked a lot about fair data. It's about instilling the idea that data should be fair and so open and available for sharing and reuse. How you engage with the EOS, what platforms do you have in your own institution? Do you have a preservation platform where you're storing, or your researchers are storing all their data. That could be made available to the EOSC so that their data could be made available for sharing and reuse. If you don't have an institutional platform, where are your researchers storing their data? Are they using commercial service like Figshare or another provider? Or are they doing what they shouldn't be doing, which is storing it on a hard disk of an unbacked up PC, which will be lost, or on a pen, a USB stick, like an arts humanities person will store it on a pen, lose the pen, and lose all the data. We did a survey in my institution. Miriam and Daniel did a survey looking at research data practices across the whole institution. And about half the institution used unbacked up PCs to store their data on a hard disk or a USB stick. Some even preferred to use paper rather than digital storage as a way of storing. I said they must be historians, because any historian would say something like that. But an engineer professor said, no, some of them are probably engineers as well, because they prefer to use paper rather than using digital means. So that's a role, that again is a role for the library in the research data space, about changing the culture and changing the practice and advocating what best practice is in storage. No, so for us in UCL, we're building a research data storage platform. We already have one for project work, where you are a funded project administrator, or you're funded by one of these external bodies, where you can store data that you're collecting during the project. And we're just about to build a second repository for the long-term storage and preservation of research data. And it's the storage, the long-term preservation repository, that will be part of the EOSC. We'll release all the data on the storage platform to EOSC, where we can safely do that. That's how we're going to engage with the European Open Science Cloud. And my advice is that you need to go back and think how you're going to engage with the cloud, what the platform is you're going to use, and how you're going to get your researchers to say this, or think this is a good idea and is the future for how research is performed and undertaken. Let me move on to the last section, and I consciously now use the slides from my colleague, Dr. Tiberius Ignat, who is a particular expert in citizen science. And remember, when I'm talking about citizen science, I'm not talking about simply biological science or physical sciences. I'm talking about everything, arts, humanities, and social sciences as well. And science isn't just something that scientists do. Science, in the sense of scholarship, is something that every single one of us has a stake in. And in my country, in the UK, citizen science is now of great interest to Vice-Chancellors. And why do you think suddenly they've become interested in citizen science? My third question to the audience, why is citizen science interesting to Vice-Chancellors in the UK, do you think? Impact? Okay, that's partly the answer. That's a possibility. That's possibly part of the answer. I think the reason that UK Vice-Chancellors in particular are interested in citizen science it's got something to do with Brexit, actually. And I promised I wouldn't talk about Brexit, but I'm going to have to talk about it once. One of the realizations that universities have made following our ridiculous Brexit conclusions, or I think they're ridiculous, in the UK, is that there is a disjoint between universities and the general society. Because all universities wanted to stay in the union and saw loads of benefits for doing so, but it was society. Some portions of society which said we don't feel affected by the union, we don't see the benefits, this is the club we don't want to be a member of. So now universities are concerned because they're not in line with how society thinks. What's the way of mending that injury, that lesion? Citizen science is one way where you reconnect with society and try and get everybody going in the same direction again. That's why they're interested in citizen science. So if you looked at citizen science as a activity, Tiberius has listed here the various stages in the workflow that you would have to go through in order to set up a citizen science project. These are all taken largely from the Leroux Roadmap for citizen science, which Daniel Weiler, Professor Daniel Weiler from the University of Zurich has just published. It's a Leroux advice paper, so open access and available on the Leroux website. I'm going to go through these when I come on to talk about the role of libraries in citizen science. So, citizen science, there are some well-known examples. They tend to be, the better-known ones tend to be in science, in the British definition of science, in physical sciences, in biological science, so neuroscience. But there are some arts and humanities activities, and this one here at the bottom of the screen, Transcribe Bentham, is a citizen science project which my library runs, which is the one I'm going to talk about. So UCL is the main holder of the archive of Jeremy Bentham, the 19th century utilitarian philosopher. We also, we have 500,000 manuscript fragments or notebooks and letters from Bentham. We also, rather mysteriously, have his head, which is mummified, and in the college. So, well, he was slightly odd. I think as an old man was slightly odd. He thought it was a waste of money to erect statues to people because there was a much cheaper way of doing it, and that's by leaving your body, embalmed body, to be put on display. So he left us what we call his auto-icon, which is his skeleton. We have got his skeleton and his embalmed head. And he sits in a glass box on the ground floor, as Helen will remember, sits in a glass box on the ground floor of the Founders Building in UCL. And the box is on wheels, and he occasionally appears in the committee meetings if he wants to make a point. And the minutes normally say something like, "Mr. Bentham was present but did not cast a vote." So we want to respect this rather eccentric British tradition by transcribing and publishing all his writings, and that's what Transcribe Bentham is about. We had money from the Mellon Foundation to digitise all the manuscripts, so 500,000 manuscripts, something like that, and they're all open and available on the web. And citizens from all over the world have started transcribing hundreds and hundreds of these manuscripts and contributing their transcriptions to the collected Bentham works. So they transcribe from the digital copy. The transcription goes to a project officer and review committee. They review the transcription, correct any errors, and add some footnotes. And then that forms part of the published output that goes into the Bentham project, which is over a period of around 30 years to publish his complete activity. Without the citizen transcribers, it would take decades of a funded research project to do the amount of work that the transcribers have managed to do. And they don't get paid for it. So why are they doing it? They're doing it because they want to engage with the university again. They want to feel they're doing something useful. They want to make a contribution. They want to learn about what it is to be a researcher and to learn the research culture. And that's what the library provides, because the library provides the framework where that's the benefit they get. It's not financial, it's emotional and spiritual and academic. And that's why they engage. And that's why citizen science, as an aspect of open science, is important in redefining what the role of a university is in society. And in a society like mine, in the UK, where there is this disjoint between society and universities, it's a really important way of bridging the gap. I asked Ayris to list what a library could do if they wanted to engage in citizen science, and this is his list of roles for roles for libraries, and I've largely described them when describing how we administer the Transcribe Bentham project. It's about building skills, both amongst your staff and amongst the transcribers in the Transcribe Bentham example, in order to build a skills base so that you can deliver on what it is, on the research question that you have set, which in the Transcribe Bentham activity is about producing a printed, an online as well as a printed version of all Bentham's published, unpublished works. The library can offer infrastructure. That means that all the digital objects, the 500,000 digital, the digitized images of the 500,000 manuscripts are all stored in the digital collections repository that the library maintains. It's not a separately funded repository out with a third party. And if you want to engage with citizens and get citizen scientists to work, you've got to give them the infrastructure, because they won't come with infrastructure. They will come with enthusiasm. They'll come with some skill, but they won't come with the infrastructure that they need to deliver. So that's one of the things the library can do if you're delivering a library-based citizen science project. Hello.
How did you decide to do your own kind of platform as distinct from, like I came across that one, Zooniverse, which...
Yes.
So yours was UCL's own platform for citizen science rather than using a third party?
Well, that was UCL's choice. We thought it was easier. We thought it was easier to manage if we control the things in-house, and that is our culture, really, to run things locally rather than buy third-party solutions. We do buy third-party solutions. We're an ex-Libris user in terms of library management systems, and all our systems are in the cloud, provided by ex-Libris.
Citizen science platform, when there's ones out there that you could set up a project on, that like anyone here could go in and set up a project on a third party one now.
Sure. There's absolutely nothing to stop people doing that, but we prefer, as again our culture is to prefer to use in-house systems which are immediately under our control. But we wouldn't stop. I mean, there are, so Mookie Hackley, who's one of our great citizen scientists, is professor in the Institute of Neurology in UCL, and most certainly uses third-party platforms rather than UCL platforms. I, as the librarian, decided, because I'm loyal to the institution, we would try institutional platforms first, and then only use third-party platforms if we couldn't provide anything locally. We spotted a gap in the preservation platform, which is why we're spending now over £1 million building a long-term preservation platform for research data in order to fill that gap so we can engage with the European Open Science Cloud. If you're interested in citizen science, we have set up, Tiberius has set up a survey for libraries to engage with citizen science, and there are, I think, 13 questions in this survey. We sent it to 130 hand-picked libraries. We got 11 answers. And one of them was from UCL, so really we only got 10 answers. Now, why is that? It's because, as we realise, libraries aren't yet on board with citizen science. They know about open access to publications. They know they should probably be doing something about research data, but aren't quite sure what. But citizen science, they think, oh, no, that's not for us. We're saying it is for you, because if you're supporting the mission of your institution, and your institution wants to be relevant to society, then it absolutely is something that libraries should be doing. And the rules of engagement that we have laid out through how libraries engage with citizen science give you a roadmap on how to do that. So my final slide is a set of challenges, a 4-step test for libraries who want to engage in open science. If you want to take the next steps in open science, what should you do? And we're suggesting you do these 4 things. You offer leadership. You don't just follow, you lead. in open science. So when I'm in my institution, my Vice-Provost says you're never allowed to follow. Don't ever let me hear you say you're following. You have always got to lead. UCL has always got to lead. And that's my advice to you. Your library shouldn't be following. You should always be leading. You identify the infrastructure, staff, money, time, platforms that you need to deliver all these things that you want to deliver. You engage in skills development for your staff, because they won't all come with, and the citizen scientists won't all come with the skills that are needed. So there's an enormous amount of training that needs to be done to prepare yourself for an open science future. And make sure that your advocacy leads to innovation. And here we have in the iceberg diagram, this is from Geoffrey Bolton in the University of Edinburgh, which is an illustration he often uses, which is, he's describing, he calls it the open data iceberg. So he's really talking about research data, but it applies to the whole field of open science. And you see the technology bit, the challenges around technology are the bits you can see, and they're the bits at the top of the diagram. They're the easy bits, actually. The difficult bits, you see it's getting softer the further down you go. Processes and organisation, and then people, they're the biggest challenge. It's changing culture and changing the mindset, so they embrace the challenges that open science brings. Tiberius and I do run a series of workshops. This is my talk. It's just one talk from a series of talks we've given during the course of 2017 in a number of venues, whole-day workshops on open science to engage with libraries across the continent on how you can change your practices and where you can start to embrace open science activities. If you would like a day workshop in Ireland in 2018, we'd be really delighted to come back. Tiberius will come this time, along with some other speakers, to talk in more detail about the overview that I've tried to present today. If you have been listening and are still with me, thank you for listening, and I'm very happy to hear any questions you might have to ask.